Hi everyone, welcome back. This is now part 5 of the video series on anemia. In videos 1 through 4, you learn about all the other causes of anemia. So this is it. All that's left is hemolysis, and we're going to start learning about it right now. So let's get started. Okay, so this is all covered in prior videos, but I'll do a quick 1-minute recap to make sure you all start off on the same page. So anemia is a decrease in the red blood cell mass and is diagnosed by a low hemoglobin and hematocrit on a CBC. Once we find this, we need to figure out what caused the anemia. So we use this diagnostic algorithm that uses the MCV. MCV is the average volume or size of the red blood cells, and normal is 80 to 100 femtoliters. So diseases that cause anemia with a low MCV are put in this bucket of microcytic anemia. Those with a high MCV are put in this bucket of macrocytic anemia. And then finally, those with a normal MCV are in this bucket of normocytic anemia. And this bucket is where we're going to find hemolysis. So when you have a normal MCV, the cause can be either hemolysis or non-hemolytic, such as red blood cell underproduction diseases. So the next step to figure that out is to get the reticulocyte level, because it's going to be high in hemolysis and low in non-hemolytic causes. So the punchline summary is, in hemolysis, anemia is going to be associated with a normal MCV and a high reticulocyte level. So let's start with the two main points about hemolysis. First, the mechanism. So in hemolysis, the word hemo refers to the red blood cells and lysis refers to their destruction. So the problem in hemolysis is excessive destruction of the red blood cells, and this is how it causes anemia. The bone marrow is going to figure out that the red blood cells are getting destroyed and there's severe anemia. It's going to say, hey, we have a problem. We need to increase production. So it's going to rev up erythropoiesis and red blood cell generation. And as a consequence, a lot more reticulocytes are made and pumped out into the blood from the bone marrow. And this is why reticulocyte levels in hemolytic anemia are going to be high. There's one caveat about this that I'll explain at the end of the video. But as a rule, when hemolysis is the cause of anemia, retic levels are high, and this is why. Now, the next thing to learn about hemolysis is how it's classified. There are two classifications. One is called intravascular versus extravascular. So this refers to the location of hemolysis, so where hemolysis is happening. The other one is intrinsic versus extrinsic. This one refers to the cause of hemolysis, so why hemolysis is happening. And this can sometimes cause confusion. People think intrinsic means intravascular and extrinsic means extravascular. It doesn't. These have nothing to do with each other. They're just two different ways of categorizing the hemolysis. One is based on location, the other is based on the underlying cause, and they're both very important. So we're going to spend the rest of this video learning about each of these. Okay, so let's start with the location of hemolysis, and the two options are intravascular or extravascular. Let's do intravascular first. So intravascular hemolysis means that the red blood cells are getting lysed in circulation in the blood vessels. And when this goes down, there are three main things that are going to happen. So first, here's our red blood cell. It's going to lyse in the circulation, and so all its internal content is going to spill out into the blood. And there are two main things that are going to be released from the red blood cells. Number one, of course, is hemoglobin, and then number two is LDH, which stands for lactate dehydrogenase. So let's do a quick biochem spiral here. Since mature red blood cells don't have any mitochondria, they are entirely dependent on glycolysis for energy, and LDH is the enzyme that regenerates NAD+, so it's essential for allowing continuation of glycolysis, and this is why red blood cells have very high levels of LDH inside of them, which is going to spill out into the blood when they're lysed. Now, getting back to the hemoglobin, free hemoglobin floating out in the blood is dangerous to the body because it can cause oxidative damage, coagulation problems, and other issues. So some of it has to get picked up by a protein called haptoglobin. Haptoglobin is a protein that's made by the liver but hangs out in blood because its main job is to find and bind free hemoglobin and clear it from the circulation. And the way that it does this is by binding it, they're going to together go over to the spleen, and then inside the spleen, the macrophages are going to break down the hemoglobin, and as the heme gets broken down, the final byproduct is going to be indirect bilirubin, which is then going to get secreted into blood. Now, there's not enough haptoglobin to bind all the hemoglobin that was spilled out of our red blood cells, so some of this hemoglobin is going to remain free in the blood and circulate to all the other organs. And when this free hemoglobin gets to the kidneys, it becomes filtered into the urinary system. And this causes the two very high-yield pathognomonic findings of intravascular hemolysis. Number one is hemoglobinuria. So this means hemoglobin inside the urine, and this is going to give the urine a classic pink-red color, characteristic of intravascular hemolysis. And then number two is hemosideриnuria. So this means hemosiderin in the urine, and hemosiderin usually has a darker more brown color compared to hemoglobin. And the reason for this is that over time, usually in cases of chronic intravascular hemolysis, some of that hemoglobin that was in the urinary system gets taken up and processed by the renal tubular cells, and the iron gets stored in the form of hemosiderin inside of those cells. And when those cells eventually die and slough off into the urine, this is going to give the urine a brown color due to the presence of hemosiderin inside of those cells. So to summarize, here are the 4 key findings of intravascular hemolysis. Number 1 is increased serum indirect bilirubin from the heme breakdown. This is going to cause jaundice and formation of pigmented gallstones. Number 2 is increased serum LDH from the red blood cell lysis. Number 3 is decreased serum haptoglobin, and that's because when haptoglobin binds hemoglobin, they together get removed from the circulation. Then finally, number 4 are the urinary findings of hemoglobin and hemosideриnuria. Okay, so now let's move on to extravascular hemolysis. So the location of hemolysis now is outside the blood vessels, and specifically it's in a region called the reticuloendothelial system. This is a complex network of cells and connective tissue, but for our purposes, we can keep it simple. So let's think of it as a spider web. So just like a spider web catches flies and traps them so a spider can come over and eat them, this reticuloendothelial system catches red blood cells, traps them so that the local macrophages can come over, eat them, and lyse them. And this reticuloendothelial system is found in the spleen, the liver, and the bone marrow, but the ones that are mostly active in hemolytic diseases are those in the spleen. So here's our red blood cell right here getting trapped in this reticuloendothelial system of the spleen. And in step 1, it's undergoing hemolysis by the splenic macrophage, and the content is released inside of the system. We have LDH and hemoglobin, just like we saw before. Now, the macrophages don't do anything to the LDH, so it just gets released unchanged into the blood right here. But the hemoglobin is a different story because these macrophages love hemoglobin, so they're actually going to break it down, which means they're going to turn it into indirect bilirubin first, and this indirect bilirubin is actually what is secreted into blood. So the key difference in extravascular hemolysis is that it does not cause large amounts of hemoglobin in the blood because it gets converted to bilirubin first here, and then the bilirubin gets secreted. So to summarize our key findings for extravascular hemolysis, we're still going to get increased serum indirect bilirubin, which causes jaundice and can cause pigmented gallstones, and we're still going to get increased serum LDH, so both of these are the same as we saw in intravascular hemolysis. One difference, though, is that the hemolysis here is in the spleen instead of the blood vessels, so all of that extra work by the spleen is going to cause it to get big, aka splenomegaly. And then the other difference here is no hemoglobin being released into blood, so no changes in serum haptoglobin and no hemoglobin or hemosiderin in the urine. So it's very important to know the lab abnormalities of hemolysis and to know how to use them to distinguish intravascular from extravascular. So here's a summary table to make it very clear. So in both intravascular and extravascular, the serum indirect bili is high and the serum LDH is high. So this is going to be seen in both intravascular and extravascular. But serum haptoglobin is very low or absent in intravascular, whereas it's normal or only slightly low in extravascular. And then finally, the urinary findings of hemoglobin and hemosiderin are only seen in intravascular, not in extravascular. So these two abnormalities are good markers of intravascular hemolysis only and help you distinguish it from extravascular hemolysis. So now let's move on from intravascular and extravascular to the other classification of hemolytic anemia, which is intrinsic versus extrinsic. And remember, this one is about the cause of hemolysis. So why are the red blood cells getting lysed? In intrinsic hemolysis, the defect that's causing it is within the red blood cells themselves. So these red blood cells have inherited mutations in their gene, and this is what makes them susceptible to getting hemolyzed. So since the problem is with the red blood cells themselves, it's called intrinsic. And these mutations can either cause the red blood cell membranes to be defective, leading to hemolysis, as in hereditary spherocytosis and paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria, or they can cause deficiency of a critical enzyme in red blood cells, leading to hemolysis, as in G6PD and pyruvate kinase deficiency, or finally they can cause hemoglobinopathy, which is formation of abnormal hemoglobin, and that causes hemolysis, as in sickle cell and hemoglobin C disease. And I'll explain these intrinsic diseases in more detail in the next video. So for now, the main takeaway here is intrinsic diseases are caused by an intrinsic problem in the red blood cells, and the problem in the red blood cells is one of 3 things: either a defective membrane, or a missing enzyme, or abnormal hemoglobin. In extrinsic hemolysis, the problem that's causing the hemolysis is not in the RBCs. So the red blood cells themselves are perfectly normal. They have no mutation or issues, but there's something else going on in the body that's attacking these poor, perfectly normal red blood cells, and that's why it's called extrinsic. And just like we did over here, we can also divvy up the extrinsic causes into 3 categories. So in autoimmune hemolytic anemia, our immune system is forming antibodies against our own red blood cells, leading to hemolysis. Also, some protozoa like malaria and babesia specifically can infect red blood cells, causing hemolysis. And then finally, the last category is called angiopathic. So this is when the red blood cells are getting lysed by the inner lining of blood vessels, or sometimes the heart valve. And depending on the size of that vessel where hemolysis happens, this is called either micro or macro angiopathic, but the problem is the inner lining of vessels. And I'll explain all of these extrinsic diseases in more detail in the final video of the series. So the main takeaway for now is extrinsic diseases are caused by a problem extrinsic to the red blood cells, and the main causes are either autoimmune hemolytic anemia, infection by malaria or babesia, or angiopathic. Finally, as I said before, the intrinsic and extrinsic causes have no correlation with the intravascular and extravascular location of hemolysis. So for example, some of these intrinsic diseases cause only intravascular hemolysis, whereas others cause mainly extravascular hemolysis, and others can actually cause both. And the same thing here for the extrinsic diseases, and I'll cover that when we learn about each disease in the following videos. Okay, so before we wrap up learning about hemolysis, let's talk about one final thing. As I said before, the general rule is that reticulocyte levels are high in hemolysis, but I also mentioned that there's one caveat to this rule, and this is a very important exception that you need to learn, because you will get test questions where you have a hemolytic anemia and the reticulocyte levels might be low, so I don't want you to be confused. So when you see low reticulocyte count in somebody with hemolytic disease, all that means is that they have an additional problem on top of their hemolysis that is leading to underproduction of red blood cells. So let's pick sickle cell disease as an example. Somebody with sickle cell should have high retics because their bone marrow is compensating for the red blood cell destruction. But if something slows this down, they're going to get worsening of their anemia and a low reticulocyte count. And this will be your clue that, hey, this isn't just the hemolysis from sickle cell. There's a secondary problem going on. And there are 3 main causes that this is going to be from. Number 1 is iron deficiency, because these patients are chronically using up iron excessively to build new red blood cells, so they're going to run out of iron. Number 2 is folate deficiency, and this is for the same reason. They can also run out of folate because of their chronic hemolysis and overuse. And an extra clue here might be that they would have macrocytic anemia because of the folate deficiency. And then finally, a third cause is aplastic crisis. This is an infection by parvovirus B19, which attacks the red blood cell precursor cells in the bone marrow and shuts down their production. And if you want to learn more about parvovirus aplastic crisis, it's covered in the prior video in the series. So when you get a hemolytic case, and if the reticulocyte count is low, pay attention and watch out for these 3 things. Okay, that's it and that's all. Please drop a comment below and let me know what you thought of the video. And if you thought it was good, please hit the like button, share it with others. And then finally, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on upcoming content. But for now, thank you for watching and I'll see you next time.